welcome everybody to today's conversation about coding in the classroom. I'm super excited because I get to share with you the brilliance of Miss Carrie Wardle. She is, like me, the teacher ambassador out in Idaho. But prior to that was a elementary school teacher, mostly in 5th grade. Is this correct?
Yep, 5th grade.
Okay, so we're going to tap into her expertise because, full transparency, I have only taught coding in a couple classrooms, and this was something that for me, when I heard about coding in the classroom, honestly, I was a little skeptical. I was like, how are 1st graders? I don't understand. Like, I was thinking of coding as ones and zeros and writing JavaScript, and that is part of coding. But then when I learned more about coding and how coding is approached in the elementary school classroom and how those skills build to the high school classroom, things started to make a lot more sense to me. So those are our goals today. So how about for you, Carrie, how did you get interested in coding? What was your how did you bring that into your classroom?
You know, I am a total techie computer nerd, and I think I really got interested in coding one year when I had a student that he was a tough kid, but he loved that. He loved being on computers. He loved coding. He loved figuring it out. And really, he knew how to do it and kind of showed me things. And I jumped in and started learning code.org and a variety of things. And so really, because I had a kid, and that was the one way that we connected. We had had a rough year, and he was a difficult kid, and he had a rough few years at school, but we connected with that. And then I began letting him create things via code and coding projects instead of doing them, you know, the traditional way in class. So that was really kind of my first deep dive about 5 or 6 years ago, I think. And then from there, I just have gained such a love for it and seen the amazing difference it makes for kids who really connect with that and sometimes don't connect with anything else.
That's a great reminder that I think that's a great reminder that you wouldn't have to introduce coding to your classroom to everyone all at once. Right. Like, this can be something that if you're a little nervous about it or you're not sure how it's going to go, that you could roll out in baby steps by tapping into some of those students who already have that fire and make time for them, whether it's in a genius hour or kind of an independent study time or a station, like that kid can explore and you don't have to be the expert. Because for me as a teacher, that was a lot of the reason what stopped me from trying new things was just because I was like, well, I don't know anything about this. And I really, as a teacher, when am I going to learn this? I don't have time. And so I like your suggestion that you're connecting to that kid. So you're building that classroom community of finding a way to, you know, talk to that student, but you're also empowering that kid, because now that kid who maybe was viewed as a bad student, and I'm not saying you did not say that, but now that kid can be empowered to be a student leader.
Absolutely. And I had a 2nd grade teacher last year that did just that. She was nervous about implementing, we were using the Scratch Junior, and so she pulled aside 3 kids that she knew were into that loved that kind of stuff, talked to their parents, asked them to download the app and learn it at home, and they did, and then they led the class and kind of taught the other group. And she was so excited about it, and the kids were excited, and it was just an amazing thing. And she did that, and she told me, because she was scared to do it by herself. She was scared. She didn't know what she was doing. So I think there's a million ways that you can implement that in your classroom.
That's a great tip too. I went to a 2nd grade classroom as well last year and helped them with Scratch Junior. And one of the ways that teacher got over the devices hurdle is similar to what you're saying. She didn't ask the kids to practice, because I was able to come and model and teach that with her kids. But she did ask the kids who had devices if they were willing to put the app on their device, because it's a free app, and to bring those devices. And then she kept them in her classroom, and then they kept them there for a certain, for those couple of days, and then they went back home. But that's another great tip of, there are a lot of kids, not every kid has a device, and so we have to be careful about how we're phrasing those things. I think some kids can be sensitive of what they don't have, but those families who do have, because it worked, I had kids who had it on their Kindle Fire and were able to use some of those things. So why do you like teaching coding?
Well, there's so many reasons, but it's more than just creating a program, but there's problem solving, and there's, sequencing is included in there, and it's a critical thinking skills have to be, you kind of have to be at the top of your game. Plus there's also the problem solving with when something doesn't go right and they have to go back and figure it out. And so perseverance, which is huge today, that we're seeing, that kids don't often, they struggle with that. And so really coding helps with that perseverance, like try it. If it messes up, try it again. So those are just kind of the top things that stick in my mind, and none of that was about teaching a kid to code. It was all about teaching kids those skills that they need to be successful in life later,
Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I liked this. Can you all see this 10 reasons to teach coding infographic? You just hit on most of those of just in your experience. And that was me as someone who was, like I said, was skeptical of like, why would we teach little kids to code? The more I thought about it and the more I saw it as a teacher of writing in high school, I was like, oh, actually this whole sequence thing, for like, if they start thinking in sequences and they start thinking of problem solving, this actually could be very beneficial for them for their writing as they come into high school. Do you have any, is that a totally bizarre thought on my part, or can you speak to that at all?
No, and there's actually it's a video on YouTube called Think Playgrounds, Not Playpens, where she says, and I love this quote, she says, we teach all kids to code. We teach all kids to write, not with the expectation that they're all going to become journalists or authors or these amazing writers, but because of the skill set that it helps them develop, and because of, how many things you need writing for in this day and age. So when we teach writing to kids, it's not with the intent that they're going to go on and become this amazing author. And the same applies to coding. We don't teach coding to kids with the idea that everyone's going to become a computer programmer and an engineer and, all that kind of stuff. But all of those skills carry into other things, like you said, sequencing. Then they learn to start writing and sequencing. And so it's more than just teaching them to code, but it's all of those skills that come with it.
That's great. I like that example too, because there are some practical advantages. Coding is its own language. And while some of the coding for younger kids, like I said, it's not ones and zeros, is one of the things that was interesting to me to learn as I started learning about coding, but it's building up to, it's implanting that way of thinking and approaching problem. And to Carrie's earlier point, most importantly, it's helping them power through when something is messed up. They immediately see that it's messed up. Their code isn't running the way they want it to run, but they have to then troubleshoot and figure out how to do it. I did want to share, just because I thought that this was, if anyone wasn't sure why you should code, a lot of these are the things that Carrie has also just shared, but I thought that this was a nice, succinct, why kids should code.
Hello world, Brian here. Today we're going to talk about 10 reasons kids should code, according to Tinker. Number 1, coding helps kids visualize abstract concepts and lets them apply math to real-world situations. Number 2, kids who code understand the value of planning, which results in better writing skills. In coding, kids learn through experimentation and strengthen their brains, which allows them to embrace their creativity. Parents enthusiastically report that they've noticed their kids' confidence building as they learn to problem solve through coding. Number 5, as kids write more complicated code, they naturally develop better focus and organization. If coding comes debugging, and there's no better way to build perseverance and resilience than working through challenges. Learning a new language through coding teaches logical communication, strengthening both verbal and written skills. Kids are empowered to make a difference when they code. We've seen students spread positive messages of tolerance and kindness through coding. Number 9, coding is a basic literacy in the digital age, and it's important for kids to understand and to be able to innovate with technology around them. And finally, there's a high demand for workers in the tech industry. Mastering coding at a young age allows kids to excel in any field they choose.
So I thought that was a pretty simple overview. I have heard that statistic that sometime in the future, when there are computers running everything, there will either be, you can either have a job where you are taking instructions or following something that a computer is telling you to do, or you can be the person who tells the computer what to do. And like, I agree with you, Carrie, that we're not saying that every kid is going to grow up and become a coder. But we do know right now, I think the average coder salary is around $80,000. So it is a good profession, and we know that it's also a growing profession, and there's becoming more and more coding in every aspect of every career. There's coding in computer science in combines to harvest in the fields now. So there are very few industries that are outside of the scope of coding. Kim, have you done any coding with your kids at the library?
Yeah, I have. I'm still learning, but like Carrie said, the kids can kind of teach us too. And that's exciting for students to be able to teach the teacher. And I just am honest with them, and I'll say, like, we do hour of code in the library, which ends up being half an hour of code because our library skills are only half an hour, but I get them on code.org. And if I want to limit the ones that they're going to, I'll just create a QR that they can use their iPads, a QR code. They can use their iPads and just scan it in, whichever one they choose. Mm-hmm. But I also agree with Carrie when she was talking about, it's exciting because the students who may not be as successful in the traditional classroom, they might excel at code, and then I can say, oh, so-and-so is the expert today. If you have questions on this, ask him or ask her. And they just get a boost from that because they're the ones that are successful. And kind of the opposite is true as well. Some of the students who are straight A students catch on to things really quickly. Mm-hmm. They may struggle with coding because it's just not the way their brain works necessarily, or they haven't had a lot of experience with it. And so it's really neat to see it kind of flip around, where the students that, are real good at it can teach the other ones. And I love that part of it. But I'm still learning, so they're teaching me, and I'll tell them, if this is what I know. If you have more you can teach me, I'd be open to learning that. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. So I really enjoy it, but like I said, I'm still learning about it. So
Understandable, and so am I. I'm going to share, so my suggestion, and Kim, it sounds like you had a similar experience, and it looks like we might have lost Carrie there for a moment. I think that code.org is the easy, not a problem. I think we lost Carrie for a second.
It just froze and then kicked me out. Sorry about that.
But both of you have mentioned code.org, and this is a one-stop shop for coding resources. If you want teacher training modules, I didn't know this until I was digging through their site a little bit, but you can see they have free teacher training modules for K through 12. And so you can look at what is your skill level, what are the skill level of your kiddos, and you can find something to work for you. I did want to show people just how easy it is. So this is code.org. And under the Learn tab, if you go under Teach, that's where you can find some of those training modules. So they have these full courses. You can create an account. Have either of you, do you have your students make accounts for themselves to track their coding?
I have not, but I do share with them, like I'll send home a little slip of paper that says code.org, because then they can go back to the sites that we were on and do more at home. And I do tell them that they can, at home, if with their parents' permission, they can log in to participate in the hour of code.
That's
great. Yeah.
I like Star Wars, so I will share this little Star Wars. You can see that even within the game, it has different ages. So as I've been starting to try things, I've been trying the younger version, thinking that might be easier for me to learn. And since it's Star Wars, and I don't want this to be too loud, it does have a little opening video that it shows with things. So this kind of goes through Build Your Own Star Wars, and it's connected to the Hour of Code. We're not gonna watch that. I just want you to see how easy this layout is with everything. So I need to make him go pick up the scrap metal, and so there's counting skills, right? I need to make him move right, and I need to give him those commands. Why is this not snapping? There we go. And then when I run my code, there we go. I did that puzzle. And then it takes me to, I need to hit continue. And then it continues and the games get progressively harder. So you can see this next one, I have to do a few more steps, and then I have to continue giving it directions. So each game gets a little bit harder. There are more obstacles to move around, and then you run your code. So that's how easy Hour of Code is, and I like it. Like I said, it seems to make sense to me because it sequentially builds that skill. So the kid who doesn't know what to do, that's fine, because the structure within the Hour of Code games starts from such a basic level that they will just intuitively build those skills. Carrie, can you talk, have you seen these coding skills transfer into just the kids thinking and problem solving in the classroom in general?
Yeah, you know, one of the things from that little video that you showed that I didn't talk about that stuck out and that I've seen then transfer into the classroom is kids learning through experimentation. Kids today don't do that as often, and I was a huge just jump in and do it kind of teacher, and that freaked kids out a lot because, you know,
they don't want to be wrong.
Yeah, and they're so used to step-by-step instructions for everything that we do and the right answer. And so that was something that made a big difference in my class with their confidence in just jumping in and trying something. And if it was wrong, it was okay because we were going to fix it. or I was going to help them correct it, or, you know, they were going to figure out how to fix it. And I saw that shift kind of, you know, throughout the year, and throughout my teaching career, from years when I didn't do it to years when I did code, that kids were just way more willing to jump in and do it. But the problem solving and the sequencing and those kinds of things, yeah, I mean, I see all of that.
That's great. Kim, you mentioned the Hour of Code. So I do have some resources here for the Hour of Code. This, I believe, is also, I mean, it's part of code.org.
Okay.
They're connected. At least they have a lot of the same resources. But there's a global event, December 3rd through 9th, where they try to get as many people, as many kids coding at the same time as possible. So Hour of Code has some pretty simple resources. Again, different activities you can use, how to promote it at your school. And the goal is to have a whole bunch of people coding together. I've heard from schools, I believe Kindred, North Dakota, for Hour of Code, they arrange for the entire school to be in the gym together, and they all do Hour of Code. So you could have an Hour of Code event of all different sizes from just your classroom. You could certainly do an Hour of Code as a grade level, as a school. But I think that this is a cool way to just show kids we're learning a skill that people all over the world are using. Have either of you done the Hour of Code event?
Just in my library skills in December. And I have shown, I don't know if that's the same video as the last couple of years, but I have shown that video that's on that first page that you're showing right now.
Mm-hmm.
If that's the one I'm thinking of.
This one?
I think that's different than the ones I've shown in the past. So I'll take a look at this one. But they might have just updated it.
Mm-hmm.
But the kids love it because they're seeing other kids coding. Oh my God, it's the one.
That's great. So these are some of the, I think, the most direct places to go to get started because they've made it so easy. All of the games and activities are free. Everything's right there. It's all there for you as a teacher. I have shared in here some other coding sites. I have not used these. Carrie, have you used any of these coding sites in your coding work?
I've done a little with the Google, the CS First, and then I've done Tinker.
Okay.
That as well.
Okay. So I did like that some of the games, I mean, you're going to find games that work for wherever your kids' skill level are. Some of these are obviously a little bit more challenging, so they're fit well for some of the older kids. And then there are also, in addition to the coding games with computers, there are other coding games and activities that you can use with other devices. And so I've put down here some things, and I know there are more. This is not an exhaustive list. But these are things that I've seen students play with. The Osmo, which has a coding set, but you can play other games with Osmo. Scratch and Scratch Junior. Scratch Junior, there's the PBS Scratch Junior that we're going to talk about next week. And that's an iPad app. We've mentioned that already here today. But there's also these Sphero and Bebots. And all of these things are things that kids can program. And then instead of programming something that's on a computer, they can program something that's actually right in front of them that they're seeing move around. Have you done any work with teachers with any of these things, Carrie?
I've done Osmo and the PBS Kids Scratch Junior,
Okay.
a lot of PBS Kids Scratch Junior, but a little bit of the Osmo as well.
Okay. I like the Sphero. A teacher from Bismarck shared a lesson with me last year. She liked the Sphero, some of these coding balls, because it involves, it's more tactile. So the kids need to make some sort of obstacle course and then guide Sphero through it. So it's coding, but they're also having to measure. And so for her and her lesson, she said that she learned that she needed to pre-rip the tape that the kids were using because there was an excessive amount of wasted tape. So word to the wise, if you do something like this, maybe have a tape strategy. But she said that then kids were using all their measuring. And I believe this was a 4th grade classroom. And so using the measuring tools was a key part of their curriculum. So now, in addition to doing these problem-solving skills, she's also tying the Sphero right into the curriculum that they're having to do in their class anyway. And the kids, instead of just measuring things, they're building a maze for Sphero and then programming Sphero to go through what they have created. I know those things take money, though. That's the only downside to any of those things. So I would say B-Bots are going to be for littler kids. I would think kind of 2nd grade and younger, maybe 3rd grade. And Spheros, I would say, you know, really probably 2nd grade on up. I mean, high schoolers would enjoy playing with the Sphero. Have either of you any other comments about any of these tools, why you like them, how you use them?
Our school, well, all the schools in my district received a grant, so they got a classroom set of Spheros and Ozobots. So the teachers can use those. It's a set of, I think, 12. So the student can work together and then the teachers just check them out. And we keep them plugged in a cart in the library.
That's cool.
Yeah, and it's neat to see what they're doing with them.
That's very cool. Go ahead, Carrie.
One of the things that I love about the PBS Kids Scratch Junior versus Code.org, and they're both fantastic, but if you noticed, Code.org, even at the basic level, required kids to be able to read.
Correct.
Right, move down. Scratch Junior does not. And so even a little bit younger kids, like kindergarten and even, you know, depending on where they're at, some older 4-year-olds can jump in and do that, even if they're not fluent readers yet. And same thing with if they're language learners or, you know, if they have reading disabilities or things like that. So that's one of the things that I love about Scratch Junior, is that it doesn't require you to be able to read.
That's a great point, because it's all graphic based. So it's images of an arrow and images in different directions. And so you're reading, which is another good skill for kids, right? It's a different type of reading. They're still reading, they're reading the pictures, but they're not having to read in the same way that might intimidate some kids, or literally they might not have that skill yet. And you're right, that's one of the cool things about Scratch Junior. I also have shared, I wanted to talk to the two of you now just about some ideas of how to implement coding in the classroom, because as we've already talked, trying something new can be a bit scary. So how did you start? You already shared, Carrie, that you kind of started because one kid was interested. Can you talk to us a little bit, describe what did your classroom look like, or what different, because now that you're in many classrooms, teaching other teachers how to use coding in their classrooms, what are some of the ways that you've seen coding implemented into a classroom, like just structurally? How does a teacher set this up for success?
Gosh, lots of ways. Most teachers I work with a lot of schools that don't have one-to-one devices.
Mhm.
So they do a center type of activity where maybe one center, the kids are doing what are called unplugged activities that
Okay.
kind of relate to coding, but they're not on the device. And then another one, the kids might be with the planning sheet, planning what their coding project is going to look like after they've done the lesson. And then the next center is they're actually coding. And the teachers rotated them through that. And so as far as being, and I've had the teachers where they pair them up and they have them code together, and they each kind of get to do their own page or something,
That's
on the
cool.
code thing. Sometimes it's hard if you don't have enough devices, but anyway, those are a couple of ways that I've seen it done.
It's hard when you don't have enough devices, mostly because, at least from what I've seen, the kids get so excited about it that they all want to do it, and they don't want to have to share.
Right, it is hard.
Excited, and they want to do their own creations. So it's kind of a good problem to have, in that the students have really been sparked and are really engaged and interested because they all want to actually do what you're doing in class.
Right.
And Kim, you already mentioned that you have the classroom sets, so very similar. Like when kids are working on a Sphero project, they need to be in teams. And some of the coding activities lend themselves a bit better to working in a team. Some of the code.org games, yes, you can work on those as a team, but there's not as much for multiple people to do. As you saw with the little game that I was playing, if another person, we could have worked on it together and done our counting together. But for something like the Sphero, when you're having to do a lot of measuring and doing different things, I can see that working better for a small group of people. I was trying to think outside the box too about this coding. And Carrie, you just mentioned some station work that were other. I was trying to think, now that I've drank the Kool-Aid and I see the value in coding in general, particularly this problem solving and sequential thinking, I was thinking, if I didn't have devices, how could I do this? If I don't have the money for things, how can I get the benefit of some of the coding skills without always having the devices? And so the two things that I came up with were make the kids the robots. So in that element of a Sphero, where you set up a maze, and I think you could even use one of the Sphero, like one of those Sphero videos, and show the kids, see, there are these robots, but we don't even need a robot because you're gonna be the robots. And the kids could even, they could have a robot helmet or something that they put on when they're the robot. And they as the robot cannot make any decisions. All they can do is follow the directions that the coder is given them. And so now you could set up a little obstacle course, or just have the robot have to navigate through the classroom. And so now the student who is the coder would have to write down a sequence of steps and then read those out loud to the robot, and the robot has to follow and see if there's success. I think you would maybe have to set up some standard step distance, and I don't know how you would do that, but I think you would work it out. And then today, as I was thinking about it, I was in Science Olympiad because I was super cool in high school. So I was on the Science Olympiad team, and one of the events that I did, and not to brag too much, but was a state champion I was the state champion for North Dakota in Write It, Do It in 1997. And it dawned on me this morning that basically what Write It, Do It is it's the basic coding sequences. You have some sort of object that is built, and I was always the person who would go and I would have that object, and then I had to write down instructions for my partner who then would get a separate set of whatever it was, Legos or Tinker Toys or whatever. And then my partner, using only the tools and my instructions, had to build and then build an object. And then we were scored based on how similar the actual object was to what the instructions built. And I think that could be a very simple coding station where kids are creating a little, it's much more tactile, but they're still having to do the sequential thinking. And then if they have their robot friend follow their instructions and their object comes out differently, the programmer has to go back and rewrite the instructions to fix that problem. So I think you could do some of those things. And we were chatting before we started, Carrie, and you said you have a couple, you've seen a few and you've done a few other things like that don't require tech.
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of things. The human robot one, which is what you just talked about, Code the Kids, is the same thing. I've done that. And the PBS Kids Scratch Junior has a template with the blocks that kids can cut out, so they could cut out the actual blocks and code each other. So I've had them do that. I did it at a summer school program, and I had them code each other around the halls of the school.
That's awesome.
So, there weren't kids in class, and they loved it. And so they had to get their person, from the cafeteria through the halls of the school and back to the cafeteria. Yeah. And then I've also done Q-tip mazes. And so they create a maze out of Q-tips, again, using the block format, the block template. And then I had little animals from my 4-year-old son, and I let them pick an animal. They built a maze, and then they had to code their animals through it. We laid those out. Cool. It was way fun. The kids loved it. So they were laid out all over the floor, and then they got to try each other's mazes as well and take their little animals and go try different mazes. So that's a super creative way, because they're building the maze and then they're coding through it. Mm-hmm. And then one thing just that I, some kindergarten teachers that I had that did, and theirs was in preparation to start teaching their kids to code, but they spent the whole first semester of school, they printed out big full sheet versions of the blocks, and they used those as their instructions throughout the day. So when they wanted kids to go, they held up the green flag. So this was in reference to Scratch Junior, but the green flag was the signal for kids to go. In the direction that they wanted the kids to move, they would hold up that block and the kids would follow it. When they wanted the kids to jump or whatever. And so by the time, so they did that for the until Christmas. When they came back from Christmas, they opened up the app, and those kids were like, wait, we know what all these things do, because they had already used those blocks to just play various games, Simon Says, and just different things in their class.
Yeah, like that's like a cool way to introduce those coding, like the symbols and things. It's like playing Simon Says of what is this going to do? Mm-hmm. That's a really, I love that. Idea.
That team of kindergarten teachers that I trained came up with that, and it was amazing. So those are just a nice
way. I mean, we talk so much about scaffolding things and how to explain things to kids. Well, if we make, and this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, reading things. If the kids understand what that symbol means, if they know how to read that type of text, even though it's not a word, it's a pictogram basically. If they know how to read that type of text, then it's super easy for them to do whatever comes next. And
and I love that, because there's so many skills already kids are trying to figure out. I mean, for those little kids to drag the block across the screen, and there's all of those hand-eye things. And so one less thing for them to worry about was, I don't know what these blocks do, because they knew all the blocks, so they could just work on those other skills that took them some time to develop. And I think that was one of the most genius things that I've seen, and that was with kindergartners.
And that's also just kind of it's also a fun little classroom management tool of, there's a lot of things going on there that it's building them this classroom community, like everybody knows the symbols, and just a simple way for them to, go through that part of their day. Yep. How about you, Kim? Do you have any tips, tricks, things that you've enjoyed as you've launched our half hour of code in the library?
One of the things that I found, and I think it was in the lessons on code.org, was help the fur find the fruit. And it was a kindergarten lesson, and I just made a big grid, and then I made big giant arrows where there's the fur, which is a little furry creature, and then you put a fruit on one part of the grid, and the kids have to tell you which, like how many times they use the up arrow, how many times they use the side arrow, to help guide the fur through this grid,
To go get the fruit.
Yeah. And there's worksheets and stuff. We did it mostly together in class, but you could do the worksheet as well. So that was kind of neat because it was just very basic coding for the kindergartners, and they didn't need electronics for that.
Yeah. And I just think anytime we've talked about this and other things as we've had these conversations, I think technology is amazing. But I don't think the average kid can be on technology all the time. And so having multiple ways of doing this, like I was even thinking of, different in high school, I made my students do demonstration speeches, right? And they had to demonstrate how to do something. And one of the basics, when a kid couldn't come up with anything, I was like, then demonstrate how to build a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Give me the steps from start to finish of doing a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And it was amazing how much, even I had one girl, I remember, who did a speech on curling your hair. And that was her demonstration speech. But part of the speech was they had to provide step-by-step instructions, written instructions as well. And I didn't realize it at the time, but basically I was asking them to think sequentially in the same way that you do when you code. But there were this girl, the hair curling example, I remember there were so many things, like, I was like, so I just pull this thing out and it's ready to go? And she was like, what do you mean? And I was like, well, you don't have any instruction in here on plugging it in or like letting it warm up or any of those things. So I like that grid example because you're working on counting skills, you're working on direction skills, you're playing a fun game out of it. And certainly you could throw in some prepositions, right? Maybe there's a rock that they have to go around, or there's a little lake on the grid that they have to go across, or there's a stick that they have to jump over. And so now, even in Kim's simple grid activity with the furry creature and the fruit, the kids could create a little story as they're coding.
Such an English teacher.
I know.
That's what I was thinking.
How to incorporate prepositions.
I am such an English teacher.
I love it.
My mind automatically goes, but I just have this image in my head, and I like that image. I like the worksheet that you mentioned, Kim, that would have the same grid on it, right? And then the kids would basically be telling their story of like, how is the furry creature going to get the food? Mm-hmm. And what obstacles did the furry creature have to overcome in order to get the food? And, maybe there was another big scary bear, big furry other creature that was in the grid somewhere. I think the bottom line from all of these stories, though, is the power of this type of thinking transcends the actual computer coding and really unlocks a whole wealth of things for kids to be thinking more creatively, to be problem solving. Both of you have talked at length about that, of the problem solving skills that coding helps develop in kids. Carrie, any final thoughts, any final tips of, if a teacher is still on the fence or still scared to get started?
I think that one of the things that we have to remember is that we don't always have to be the experts. And so I promise you, if you hand a device to your kids, your students, and ask them to code, they're going to figure it out and they're going to love it. And they're going to show you things that, that blow your mind. And I've done it so many times and I still am amazed with the things that kids come up with. So I would say let go of a little bit of that. I have to know what I'm doing. We have to be in control. If I can get kindergartners to code, I guarantee that teachers can do it, of any grade level and any age. It is scary, but you just got to jump in and do it. I love it.
That's great. I can't think of anything better to end with. Next week, we are going to go into a deep dive and just look at Scratch Junior. I haven't played with a ton of different coding games or apps, but of the games that I've played, the depth and the variety that Scratch Junior has, I think just really is far superior to some of the other games. And it is the English teacher in me. I love the problem solving and the storytelling components that Scratch Junior really allows the kids to build their own world and code things within that world. And I love that it's theirs and that they get to create something and then run that code. Plus, you'll see you get to do all kinds of fun things, like kids can record their voices, they can add music, they can add in different characters, they can even take photos, and so they could make a character themselves in Scratch Junior. And so there's all kinds of cool things that you can do. So join us for that, and we'll see you again soon.